This scene from Pink Panther is pretty iconic.
Let's break it down.
Well, I guess it wouldn't be so fun from Clouseau's side. Unlike his professor,
Would.
I'll give you exact techniques to help build your pronunciation skills and show you which mistakes to avoid.
B.
A.
E.
Hamburger.
Hamburger.
You probably didn't even know this, but when a word starts with P in English, it's actually aspirated.
But je parle un peu français already.
Don't believe me? Take your hand and put it in front of your mouth and repeat after me. Pie, point, perfume. Did you feel a puff of air? Well, the initial P in French words is not aspirated. Just put your lips together and pop them, but don't release a puff of air. Now repeat after me. Pomme, pays, parler. Diphthongs. This one is pretty nuanced, and a diphthong is when you slide one vowel into the next, and it's actually really common in English.
Annie! Hi! Annie, you are a doll.
Notice how she says, Annie, hi. There's so many vowel sounds that are coming out of just that one A or the one I. But French isn't like that. This, of course, depends on the way you speak English, but in English you might say okay, and you're dragging the vowel sound okay. But in French, you would say O, Pinot. It's a very stagnant O sound. The A sound is another place this comes up very frequently. In English, you might say always, say, and you notice how the A sound is going A. But in French, imagine that your mouth just freezes. Et. Now repeat after me. Passer, aller, jouer. Imagine that your mouth just freezes. Et. One of the most common mistakes I see is French learners not paying attention to the accent that's on top of an E. These aren't just random, they actually have a purpose and they change the pronunciation. Once I actually had a French speaker tell me he could tell I wasn't a native because I was saying après instead of après. Didn't hear the difference? Let's break it down. This E has an accent aigu, and this makes it E sound. Aigu. Some words that you'll see this in are épisode, désolé, épice. This next E has an accent grave, and this makes an E sound. Some words you'll hear this in are après, fier, très. The perfect word to hear this distinction is élève. So keep that in your back pocket the next time you're confused which one is which. Élève. One more thing about accent grave. This also comes up frequently in boot verbs or stem-changing verbs, like acheter. In acheter, you conjugate it just like a normal ER verb, but this boot section actually gets an accent grave on the first E to change the pronunciation a bit. So the je form is j'achète, tu achètes, il, elle achète, versus nous achetons, vous achetez, and then il, elle achète. So this comes up a lot in a lot of different stem-changing verbs, and it is a difference in pronunciation, so make sure you take note of that. Finally, we have E with accent circonflexe, and this is the same sound as accent grave. It's an eh sound, and it only changes the pronunciation if it's on the E. You'll see it appear on the O as well, like hôtel, but this doesn't change the pronunciation. Some other words that accent circonflexe comes up in are crêpe and forêt.
Oh, when you dropped your crepe.
Hashtag oh crepe.
So no, it's not oh crepe, it's crêpe. The last accent we have is accent tréma, and this comes up on E as well as other vowels. I can't believe how many teachers don't teach this because it's so important and quite easy to remember. It always appears when there's two vowels next to each other, and the tréma will always be on the second of the two vowels. Basically, it's telling you to pronounce the two vowels separately. It's like two dots, two vowels. Think of the word Noël. If you didn't have accent tréma on the E, then you would just get no. Some other words this comes up in is the country Haïti, or the word coïncidence. Let's say you wanted to build a flashcard deck for all of these sample words I'm giving you so that you have an example word for each type of accented E. When you make a flashcard deck in FluentU, not only will you get the definition, you'll also get a pronunciation guide, sample sentences, and a video dictionary. So you can hear this word pronounced in different speaking styles and different contexts, and you'll be able to recognize it not just when it's said slowly and isolated. There's a link to a free trial in the description, so don't miss out. There's very few words in French where you pronounce all of the letters, especially if it's a longer word. Typically, you don't pronounce the last letter, like épinard, avocat, radis. A loose rule is that you do pronounce the last letter if it's C, R, F, or L, but even this has its exceptions, such as ER verbs where the R is silent, like passer, aller. French is all about flow, and liaison is when you connect the last sound of one word to the first sound of the next one. This typically happens with the Z sound using X or Z, or the S sound using S. Some examples are trois enfants, 2 années, ont-ils. You don't do liaison after names or the word et, and there's a few other exceptions just like any other rule. By the way, if you like this video so far, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Now, unless there is liaison, you don't pronounce the N at the end of words. It's more of a nasal sound. Un pain. If you need help making this sound, you can try pinching your nose. And you should focus on lifting the back of your tongue to your soft palate or the squishy part at the back of your mouth. And that will block the air from passing through and you can make a nasal sound. This is almost the same as the or the ng sound you make in sing. Most words that have an N in it have this nasal sound. Ton, pardon, ballon. The only time the N is not nasalized is when you're doing liaison. So, ton oncle, mon ami, un homme.
Un pain au chocolat.
Yikes. So what Emily should be saying is un pain au chocolat, s'il vous plaît. So how do you know if something is a S sound like saucisson versus a Z sound like bisou? If a word starts with S, it's always a S sound like soup, salade, sang. And if there's two S's, it's also a S sound like princesse, saucisson, délicatesse. However, if there's just one S, then it's a Z sound like raser, bisou. Of course, there's some exceptions. If an S is next to a T, then it's a S sound because T is unvoiced. There's no voice sound, like tristesse. And it's also a S sound if the S is next to an I, like transmission, version. One really common place this comes up is ils sont versus ils ont. If you change the sound, you get a completely different verb. And you can see from this example that even though the S's are in two separate words, it's still a S sound because they're technically next to each other. Need a trick to remember? Bees go bzz, while snakes go s. People who speak American English are especially notorious for not dentalizing their T and D. How many times have you heard English speakers, or yourself, say things like enchanté or en deux trois? The T and D we have in English are different from the T and D that exist in French. Linguistically speaking, the T and D in French are dentalized, which means that your tongue is touching the back of your teeth where it meets the roof of your mouth. Like that. Take the tip of your tongue and put it right where your teeth meet the roof of your mouth, and leave it there and say these example words with me. Ton, taper, toujours. Now leave it there and pronounce these D sounds with me. Danser, donc, domicile. In cases where you see OU next to each other, you make the OU sound, like beaucoup, toujours, genou. And this OU is a lot more open than the English OU. Think about how you say the words cool, do. It's like a OU sound. But in French, you just make a stagnant OU sound. Imagine you have a little balloon in your mouth and you can't collapse your lips or your mouth. OU. On the flip side, if you just have a U, you get the notorious French U sound. And to learn how to say this, we can get a little bit of help from Clouseau.
Would.
We can actually learn a lot about the French U by looking at how his face is shaped. The trick to this is to create as little space in your mouth as possible. Get the back of your tongue up to the roof of your mouth and squish your lips together until there's absolutely no space left. And now try making the sound. U. Now repeat after me with these example words. Naturel, perdu, fondu. Ever wonder why you hear French people pronounce words with H like this?
We'll have to hand check it. Go ahead. I have nothing to hide.
I'd. That's because the initial H is not pronounced in French. Think words like habillé, homme, hibou. Now, I could give you pronunciation rules all day long, but instead I'll give you 3 overall tips to help you. The first one is that rules always have exceptions. Rules are meant to guide you, but it's best to listen to French media and native speakers and really observe how different words are pronounced, because one rule is never going to be exception-free. The second most important tip is that you must start early. Pronunciation is not one of those things that you should wait to work on. The longer you pronounce French words incorrectly, the harder it will be to change. And that's why I like having an audio-visual tool like FluentU, because every time I practice, I'm not just seeing words in front of me, I'm hearing them every single time. The third tip is that French is not English. Just like I showed you with the aspirated P and the dentalized T and D, the same letters will represent different sounds in English and French. It's best to go based off of what you're hearing rather than what you already know in English. If you want to continue building your French pronunciation skills, check out the free PDF below that includes a detailed breakdown of French pronunciation rules and their exceptions. And to continue sounding like a native and working on your skills, check out our previous video on practicing your French through comedy.